Have you ever noticed that people reveal far more than they think? You don't need to be a psychologist or a philosopher to see it. You only need to sharpen your perception. Alan Watts, one of the most provocative minds of the 20th century, believed that beneath every word, every gesture, every silence, lies an entire story waiting to be read. The irony is that most people are desperate to hide, but in their very attempt to conceal themselves, they leave cracks, tiny leaks of truth that no mask can fully cover. What if I told you that the smiles you see, the confident voices you hear, the carefully curated images on social media are not the full picture? What if every single person you meet is constantly revealing their deepest fears, insecurities and desires without even knowing it? Once you start to see these signals, you can't unsee them. It's like learning a new language. At first, the signs seem invisible, random, almost meaningless. But then suddenly, patterns emerge. The way someone pauses before answering, the laugh that lingers just a second too long, the harsh criticism that sounds less like judgment of others and more like a confession of their own hidden wounds. Watts understood that human beings live in a constant performance, but performances are imperfect, and the truth always slips through the cracks. And here's the part no one tells you. Reading people isn't about manipulation, it isn't about control, it's about understanding. Because the moment you begin to see clearly, you stop reacting to the mask and begin connecting with the person behind it. You see the child inside the adult, the wound inside the strength, the fear behind the arrogance. That awareness changes everything. In this journey, guided by 18 psychological truths inspired by Alan Watts, you're going to learn how to read anyone instantly, not by what they say, but by what they cannot hide. And once this vision opens, it never closes. This is not another list of quick tricks or shallow advice that you forget the moment the video ends. This is a structured journey, carefully laid out in 3 layers, each one designed to take you deeper than the last. Alan Watts often reminded us that the mind resists simple answers because life itself is not simple. It is layered, paradoxical, filled with illusions and hidden truths. To read people instantly is not about memorizing body language cues or rehearsing a script. It's about peeling back the layers of illusion until what is real stands clear before you. That's why this exploration is divided into 3 powerful parts, each one building on the one before. Skip a step and you miss the foundation. Miss a layer and the deeper meaning collapses. Stay with me, and by the time we reach the final truths, you won. Just recognize the patterns in others. You will recognize the same patterns alive in yourself. The first part reveals the surface masks, the little signs people leak without realizing. The second dives into the forces beneath those masks, the fears, guilts, and desires that drive behavior. And the final part takes us to the deepest level, the wounds from childhood, and the existential illusions that Watts believed shape the adult self. This is not entertainment, it's initiation. Once you step through the doorway, you cannot go back to seeing people the way you used to. The lies, the performances, the exaggerations, they will all appear to you like neon signs once you know where to look. And here is the real promise. This is not about gaining control over others, it is about gaining clarity within yourself. Because the more clearly you see them, the more clearly you see your own reflection. By the end, you won't just be watching a video, you will have taken part in a transformation, a shift of perception that will never leave you. From the moment we are born, we are handed identities. A name, a family role, a nationality, a religion, a set of expectations. We grow up believing these labels are who we are, and because everyone around us agrees, we rarely question them. Alan Watts challenged this assumption more than almost any other thinker. He insisted that what we call the self is not a solid thing but a construct, an ever-changing process wrapped in stories, roles, and masks. He warned against confusing the symbol with the reality. Words, reputations, appearances, these are only maps, not the territory. Yet because society rewards conformity, most people cling desperately to their masks. The polite smile, the practiced voice, the professional role, they are survival strategies, not revelations of essence. Watts believed this is why human beings so often feel alienated. We mistake the costume for the actor, the performance for the person. And worse, we come to mistake our own mask for our true self. The businessman who never stops performing confidence forgets what it feels like to admit fear. The parent who never lets their children see them vulnerable forgets their own softness. The young woman who curates every photo online begins to believe she really is the image she projects. But reality eventually breaks through because the mask never fits perfectly. Watts taught that life itself leaks out of the roles we try to play. A nervous laugh, a hesitation, an overreaction, all of these are cracks in the armor where the real person shows through. And here is the paradox. We long to be seen, but we fear exposure, so we hide behind symbols, forgetting that the hiding itself is the greatest confession. To read people, then, is not to memorize tricks of body language or psychological formulas. It is to see past the mask into the fluid, living process beneath. It is to remember, as Watts said, that the menu is not the meal, and the stories people tell about themselves are not the truth of what they are. Every human being wears a mask, and this is the first and most universal truth that Alan Watts would have us confront. It is tempting to assume that masks are about deceit, that people are simply being fake or manipulative, but Watts urged us to see deeper. The mask is not primarily a lie, it is a shield. It is crafted from fear, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being exposed as inadequate. From childhood, we learn quickly that certain parts of us are rewarded while others are punished or ignored. Slowly, piece by piece, we build a persona designed to be acceptable, safe, and loved. But this persona is not the whole story. Behind it remains a raw, vulnerable self that longs for expression but hesitates in the face of judgment. That is why discomfort is always the first sign that truth is slipping through the cracks. When someone suddenly shifts their tone, avoids a subject, fidgets with their hands, or forces a laugh, those are not accidents. They are the seams of the mask struggling to hold. Watts often compared social roles to theater. The problem is not that people act, but that they forget they are acting. They become lost in the performance, mistaking the role for reality. Yet the audience can often sense when the actor falters, when the script no longer fits. If you pay close attention, you will see it too. The overly cheerful friend who insists they are fine may, in their tense shoulders or darting eyes, reveal exhaustion and loneliness. The colleague who plays the part of the unshakable leader might betray fragility in the way they avoid silence or dominate a conversation. These cracks are not failures, they are glimpses of the real person beneath. Watts believed that true perception begins when we stop taking the mask at face value and start observing the tension around it. To read people instantly, you do not need to catch them in a lie. You only need to notice where the performance begins to tremble, because there, hidden in the discomfort, the truth is already speaking. The first truth is that the mask reveals more than it hides. We imagine the mask as a cover, a tool to protect identity. But Watts would remind us that the mask itself is already an admission. The carefully painted smile, the measured tone, the polished role, these do not erase the truth, but instead expose the effort to suppress it. Just as a rigid actor on stage makes the audience feel the tension of pretending, so too does every person leak their reality through the strain of performance. What they are trying hardest to project is often what they doubt most within themselves. The second truth is that what someone criticizes in others is what they cannot face in themselves. A man who constantly mocks vanity may be fighting his own obsession with appearance. A woman who condemns dishonesty may be hiding her own secret betrayals. Watts often spoke of projection as a mirror, a way the unconscious reveals itself in disguise. When you listen to criticism, don't just look at the target, look at the speaker. Their words are not weapons thrown outward, but confessions echoing inward. The third truth is that silence speaks louder than speech. Words can be rehearsed, twisted, repeated until they lose connection to reality. But pauses, hesitations, evasions, these cannot be scripted. When someone avoids a subject, when their voice drops into a sudden quiet, when they answer too quickly with something polished, the silence around their words is more telling than the content itself. Watts believed that language is a game of symbols, but silence uncovers the raw edges of being. The fourth truth is that exaggerated virtue is often disguised ego. Those who announce their goodness the loudest who correct and preach and proclaim purity, are often acting from superiority, not sincerity. Real kindness does not demand applause, it flows naturally. Watts warned that morality, when turned into performance, becomes another mask, a way for the ego to hide behind the illusion of holiness. The fifth truth is that lies begin as self-deception. Before anyone lies to you, they first lie to themselves. I'm fine. I don't care. It doesn't matter. These phrases, repeated long enough, become beliefs, armor against a painful reality. Watts observed that self-deception is not evil but survival, the psyche's way of coping with wounds too heavy to bear. When you catch someone in a contradiction, remember, they have been telling that story to themselves long before you heard it. The sixth truth is that superiority hides inferiority. The person who brags endlessly, who dominates every room, who puts others down, is not overflowing with confidence but starving for it. Their throne is built on fear. Watts often reminded us that the true self does not need to prove or dominate. It simply is. The louder someone insists on their strength, the more fragile their inner world tends to be. Behind every crown is the trembling child who fears being unseen. Together, these six truths form the beginning of clear vision. They remind us that reading people is not about catching them in deception, but about recognizing that every mask, every criticism, every silence, every lie, every boast is already a confession. Watts would say that once you see it, you begin to realize people are not hiding from you. They are hiding from themselves. Up until now, it may feel as though we have been holding a magnifying glass up to other people, observing their masks, their cracks, their contradictions. But Alan Watts would caution us against staying at the surface of this exploration. He often reminded his listeners that the boundary between me and them is much thinner than we believe. The patterns you detect in others are not foreign objects to be dissected from a distance. They are reflections of the same human struggles alive within you. To see clearly is not to stand outside of life, judging it like a scientist examining specimens. To see clearly is to recognize that what irritates you in someone else is often a projection of your own hidden fears, that what fascinates you about another's strength is often the echo of your own unclaimed potential. Watts believed that life is a mirror and every relationship is a teacher. This is why the journey cannot stop at reading people as though they are puzzles outside of yourself. If you stop here, you risk turning insight into a tool for superiority, another mask of the ego. The deeper step is to realize that each truth you uncover about others is also pointing you back to yourself. When you notice how someone hides behind exaggerated virtue, you must ask, in what ways do I also hide? When you recognize that someone's silence reveals their pain, you must wonder, what silences have I rehearsed to avoid exposing mine? Every revelation becomes a double-edged sword, cutting through their illusions and through yours simultaneously. This is where the real depth begins, because the closer you look, the more impossible it becomes to keep the division intact. Watts taught that the self and the other are not separate beings colliding in a world of masks. They are intertwined expressions of one reality. By moving deeper, you stop treating this as a technique for analyzing people and start treating it as a practice for awakening. The truth you see in them is the same truth unfolding in you. The lies you recognize, the fears you sense, the masks you detect, they are all part of the same human play in which you are both actor and audience. And to realize this is the turning point, the moment the magnifying glass transforms into a mirror, and the journey goes from observation into transformation. The seventh truth is that most human actions are born not from desire, but from fear. We imagine that people choose careers, partners, and beliefs because of passion or logic. But if you look closely, fear sits quietly behind the steering wheel. Fear of abandonment makes someone say yes when they mean no. Fear of rejection makes them talk endlessly, filling silence with words they don't even believe. Fear of failure makes them over-prepare, overcompensate, overperform. Watts often warned us that much of what we call choice is simply reaction, a defense against pain. To read someone, don't just ask what they want, ask what they are afraid of losing. The eighth truth is that constant criticism is disguised confession. When someone repeatedly mocks others, their ridicule is rarely about the target. it is about themselves. The person who calls others weak may be terrified of their own fragility. The one who mocks sensitivity may be secretly overwhelmed by their feelings. Watts believed that judgment is projection in motion, the shadow thrown outward to distract from the wound inside. If you listen carefully, criticism becomes the clearest form of self-revelation. The ninth truth is that exaggerated confidence hides guilt. There are people who never falter, who seem to carry an aura of certainty into every room. But if you pay attention, you will notice the stiffness in their performance, the clenched jaw, the rehearsed tone, the defensiveness when challenged. Watts observed that the ones who need to appear most certain are often haunted by guilt. Guilt over past choices, over hidden regrets, over parts of themselves they've tried to bury. Real confidence doesn't shout. It breathes. The 10th truth is that exaggeration betrays insecurity. A person who repeats, "I don't care what anyone thinks," usually cares deeply. The one who insists, "I am always happy," often says it to drown out their own sadness. Watts often compared this to striking a gong too loudly. The echo is not strength, but an attempt to cover silence. Extremes are almost always overcompensation. To read exaggeration is to hear the tremor beneath the boast. The 11th truth is that obsession with control masks inner chaos. We all crave stability, but when someone tries to dominate every detail, micromanaging, refusing change, enforcing rigid rules, it usually means their inner world is in disarray. Watts pointed out that those who most fear their own uncertainty try hardest to control the outside world. Control then is not power but panic disguised as order. The 12th truth is that the louder the performance, the emptier the core. Social media has made this truth painfully clear, with endless displays of curated happiness and achievement. But Watts saw it long before. Performance is desperation, wearing a smile. Those who constantly need to be seen are those who doubt they exist without validation. True wholeness has no need for an audience. The bigger the show, the deeper the void. Together, these 6 truths reveal the landscape beneath the surface. Fear, guilt, insecurity, chaos, and emptiness. To see them is not to judge, but to recognize that every mask is built on fragile ground, and that fragility is the most human confession of all. At this point, the shift becomes undeniable. You start to realize that you are not reading people's minds. You are reading the recurring patterns that emerge when their masks begin to slip. It is not about guessing hidden thoughts or prying into private secrets. It is about watching the performance and noticing where it breaks. Alan Watts often reminded us that the self we cling to is not a solid object, but a fluid process, a stream constantly changing its form. And when you witness the cracks in someone's performance, the nervous laugh that doesn't match their words, the way their eyes dart away when a topic hits too close, the endless insistence on being fine, you are witnessing that illusion fracture in real time. The fixed identity begins to dissolve, and what shows through is not deception but vulnerability. This is the great revelation of the second part. People are not difficult to read because they are mysterious. They are difficult to read because we take their masks too seriously. Once you see beyond the mask, you no longer search for the true face hiding behind it, because Watts taught that there is no single fixed face. There is only a shifting play of defenses, fears, and desires, woven together moment by moment. To expect someone to be one thing is to misunderstand the nature of being itself. And yet, paradoxically, in seeing this flux, you begin to understand people more deeply than ever before. Their contradictions stop confusing you and start making sense. Their exaggerated virtues, their desperate control, their loud performances, all of these are no longer random or frustrating. They are predictable patterns that whisper of the inner world from which they come. Suddenly, you stop reacting to the surface. You stop taking words at face value. You stop being fooled by the armor. Instead, you see the trembling human underneath, doing their best to survive. The climax of this realization is not superiority, but compassion. You realize that to read people is not to expose them, but to see them with clarity. When the illusion of a fixed self begins to crack, both theirs and yours, judgment fades and connection becomes possible. You see that the armor was never the enemy. It was only a sign that beneath it, someone longed to be safe. And once you see that, You can never look at human beings the same way again. The 13th truth is that no one speaks purely from logic. They speak from pain. What appears as a rational stance, a hardened belief, or a cold argument is often just a shield built over an old wound. A person who says, "Love is just an illusion," is not stating a fact, but protecting themselves from heartbreak. Another who insists, "You can't trust anyone," is echoing the betrayal that shaped them. Alan Watts urged us to look beneath the surface of statements and realize that logic is often pain dressed in reason, a story people tell themselves so they don't have to face the rawness of their hurt. The 14th truth is that how someone responds to weakness reveals their true strength. Anyone can admire the powerful, flatter the successful, or cling to the confident, but it is in the presence of vulnerability that character is exposed. A person who mocks fragility is terrified of their own. A person who punishes mistakes was likely never allowed to make any. Watts often spoke of compassion as the highest form of awareness, because when you can witness weakness without judgment, you prove that you are no longer enslaved by your own fear of it. The 15th truth is that those who fear being forgotten crave attention. The loudest personalities, the endless performers, the ones who must constantly be seen, are often haunted by invisibility. Childhood neglect or dismissal plants a wound that says, "If no one notices me, I don't exist." And so as adults, they demand recognition through noise, chaos, or spectacle. Watts warned that attention is not always vanity. It can be a desperate cry for existence. The 16th truth is that attacks often reveal envy. It is easier to mock than to admire, easier to tear down than to admit longing. The colleague who dismisses someone's success as luck may secretly wish they had the same courage. The friend who ridicules another's freedom may be chained by their own fears. Watts would say that envy is just unspoken desire, a mirror of the parts of ourselves we have disowned. The 17th truth is that adults do not simply act from beliefs, they repeat the roles of childhood. The child who was silenced grows into the adult who cannot listen. The one punished for feeling becomes cold and detached. The one who had to earn love continues performing for approval, even when it is toxic. Watts saw the self as a performance, stitched together from patterns learned long before we were conscious of them. To read someone, you must ask, who did they have to be to survive? The 18th truth is that patterns themselves are confessions. A person who withdraws when things get close, who works obsessively to avoid stillness, who flirts endlessly without ever committing, these are not random quirks. They are silent admissions of where the person has been wounded. Watts encouraged us to listen not to words but to rhythms, to see that repetition is memory disguised as habit. People may not say what hurt them, but they will act it out again and again. Taken together, these 6 truths reveal the deepest layer of human nature. Beneath the masks, beyond the fear, behind the performances, lies the wounded child still trying to feel safe, still trying to belong. And if you know how to listen, you will see that every pattern, every mask, every attack is not an enemy, but a confession, a quiet voice saying, "This is where I hurt, and this is what I fear repeating." By now, you may have realized something unsettling yet liberating. These 18 truths are not only about other people, they are also about you. Every mask you noticed in others is a mask you have worn. Every fear you identified in them echoes a fear that still stirs inside you. Alan Watts often reminded us that the division we make between self and other is an illusion. What frustrates you in someone else is usually the same energy you have not yet faced within yourself. What fascinates you about another person's strength is often the shadow of your own potential, waiting to be acknowledged. To read people clearly is to hold up a mirror, and in that reflection, you are confronted with your own patterns. Think of the lies you tell yourself every day. "I'm fine and I don't care, I don't need help." Are they so different from the ones you've just learned to see in others? Think of the times you've performed, exaggerating your confidence, hiding your chaos, putting on a show so no one would see the cracks. How often have you criticized others for the very things you secretly feared in yourself? These truths do not only expose the world, they expose the self. And this is where the journey takes its most radical turn. You begin to see that you are not simply the observer of illusions, you are a participant in them. Watts would say that awakening is not about judging the masks, but recognizing them for what they are. Survival strategies, temporary roles, fragile performances. The moment you see your own patterns with the same clarity you've applied to others, judgment dissolves and compassion takes its place. Instead of despising your fears, you understand them. Instead of resenting your wounds, you begin to honor the way they shaped you. So as you walk away from these truths, don't just look outward, look inward. Notice when your own voice hesitates, when you hide behind a smile, when you seek attention or control. Ask yourself not, what is wrong with me? But what am I afraid of losing? What wound am I still protecting? Because the final revelation is this: the better you read yourself, the better you understand others. And the clearer you see others, the clearer you finally see yourself. So now the question turns back to you. Out of all these 18 truths, which one pierced through your defenses? Which one held up a mirror you could not turn away from? Take a moment, not just to consume these ideas, but to sit with them, to notice where they touched something raw inside you. Comment below with the truth that resonated most deeply, not only as a way to share, but as a way to witness yourself. Alan Watts always insisted that awakening is not about passive listening, but active seeing. What you engage with, what you speak aloud, becomes the first step toward real transformation. If this journey has shifted the way you look at people, don't keep it locked inside. Share it with someone who needs to see beyond appearances, who has been fooled by words, who feels lost in the endless performance of masks. Sometimes a single idea, shared at the right time, can change the entire course of someone's perception. And perhaps that act of sharing is your way of planting clarity in a world that often prefers confusion. Above all, remember this: Alan Watts did not want us to read others just to gain advantage or to expose weakness. He wanted us to awaken to the reality that what we see in them is also alive in us. Every mask is a reminder of our own. Every fear we detect is a reflection of the ones we carry. To see people with clarity is to stop being deceived, but also to stop deceiving yourself. So if this spoke to you, if you felt even for a moment that sudden spark of recognition, then subscribe and stay. Because this is only the beginning. There are deeper layers to uncover, greater truths to explore, and more illusions to dissolve. And in every step forward, you will not only see the world more clearly, you will see yourself more clearly. The invitation is open, to wake up, to look beyond, to live with eyes unclouded by masks. The choice now is yours.